Good morning. I just want to welcome you all here again to Grace Bible Church. If you would please stand as we begin our worship service.
His house and gathered in his name. saw that it was good. You sent your only Son, for you are good. What a wonderful Maker. What a wonderful Savior. How majestic your whispers, and how humble your love, with a strength like no other, and the heart of a Father. How majestic your whispers. What a wonderful God. You made the world and saw that it was good. You sent your only Son, for you are good. What a wonderful Maker. What a wonderful Savior. How majestic your whispers, and how humble your love, with a strength like no other, and the heart of a Father. How majestic your whispers. What a wonderful God. How majestic your whispers. What a wonderful God. My faithful Father, enduring friend, your tender mercies like a river with no end, it overwhelms me, covers my sin each time I come into your presence. I stand in wonder once again. Your grace still amazes me. Your love is still a mystery each day. I fall on my knees, 'cause your grace still amazes me. Your grace still amazes me. Oh, patient Savior, you make me whole. You are the author and the healer
This morning, we're going to continue on with the book of Daniel. We're going to be in Daniel chapter 6 this morning. And as we've been looking at the life of Daniel, we're being reminded, at least for myself, just of what an exceptional person he was. And just being continuing to be challenged with the integrity of Daniel and his faithfulness in the midst of persecution and trial. And so, in looking at his life, as a young person, you're challenged to be a Daniel, right? Dare to be a Daniel. You guys ever hear that one? Yes? Okay. How does it go? Dare to be a Daniel. Dare to stand alone. Dare to... Okay. Got different versions, or at least they're the same, but they're overlapping in here. But that's the idea. Dare to be a Daniel, dare to stand alone. And I think in our world, in our culture, we've talked about the challenge of doing that, because as a group, when we're here on Sunday mornings, we're in the midst of the fellowship, we feel the encouragement, we feel the oneness in a sense. We know that we can come here and we can declare our faith in Christ. We can stand for the things of God, and we're not so concerned about being persecuted here. But when we leave this place and we're kind of out on our own, it's a little bit different. There's more challenge that is involved in that. And even though we have a strong resolve, sometimes there's a little bit of erosion that takes place in our being out in the world, that sometimes we can adapt the world's standards into our own lives, and we can kind of forget who we are. And so this is a reminder to us as we go through Daniel chapter 6 today, that there's a challenge before us. And so instead of saying dare to be a Daniel, dare to stand alone, I said dare to live an exceptional life of integrity and faithfulness, because that's what Daniel did. So turn to Daniel chapter 6, and as we look at this chapter, we're going to see how Daniel did this, how he lived an exceptional life of integrity and faithfulness. And even though chapter 6 is just one part of his life, it basically is a microcosm, if you will, of the way that he lived his life consistently over the years that we have of his life recorded in exile here in the book of Daniel. So Daniel chapter 6. I'm going to read, and hopefully all this will appear on the screens around me. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps should give account, so that the king might suffer no loss. Then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other presidents and satraps, because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Then the presidents and the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, but they could find no ground for complaint or any fault, because he was faithful, and no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, "We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel, unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." Then these presidents and satraps came by agreement to the king and said to him, "O King Darius, live forever." All the presidents of the kingdom, the prefects and the satraps, the counselors and the governors, are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction, that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document, so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Therefore, King Darius signed the document and injunction. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house, where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as he had done previously. Then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and plea before his God. Then they came near and said before the king concerning the injunction, O king, did you not sign an injunction that anyone who makes petition to any god or man within 30 days except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, the thing stands fast according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Then they answered and said before the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or the injunction you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. Then the king, when he heard these words, was much distressed and set his mind to deliver Daniel. And he labored until the sun went down to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, Know, O king, that it is a law of the Medes and Persians that no injunction or ordinance that the king established can be changed. Then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. The king declared to Daniel, May your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you. And the stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. Then at break of day, the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. As he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? Then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him. And also before you, O king, I have done no harm. Then the king was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. And the king commanded, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and cast into the den of lions, they, their children, and their wives. And before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces. Then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, Peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion, people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. This is the word of the Lord. So we know the story. We have this Daniel, and he's a faithful man. He is a man of integrity, and he is somebody who actually excels at what he does in his ability to carry out the work that's entrusted to him. And so the first point, I'm just going to get right into it, and hopefully we will get there. And I am waiting, but it will go there eventually. And here it is, right? Here it is, right? Here it is. There it is. Daniel went above and beyond expectations. Daniel went above and beyond expectations. If you're talking about living an exceptional life of integrity and faithfulness, Daniel gives us an example of this. He went above and beyond expectations. It says here that as it lays out the groundwork here behind just setting up Daniel as the one who is distinguished in all of these officials that are appointed by the king, it says that Darius set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be throughout the whole kingdom, and over them there were 3 presidents, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps should give account, so that the king might suffer no loss. And then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other presidents and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him. So we see that Daniel is above these other people in terms of his execution of his duties. to the point that he distinguishes himself, it says in verse 3. And he is not just done this with this one king, he's done this with other kings before, Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, and then now here we have this King Darius. Later on, we find out also that Daniel also excels as an official in the reign of Cyrus the Persian as well. It tells us at the end of this chapter. So we see that he's the same kind of person no matter where he is. And it's interesting because, we talk about integrity, and integrity is usually, to give you a definition, integrity is who you are when nobody's looking, right? That's kind of a definition of integrity. And Daniel lives up to that. He is a man of integrity. What you see is what you get, and you see him the same all the time. But it's hard to keep that. I think that sometimes when I watch professional sports, I'm really kind of dumbfounded sometimes that you can see a team who is clearly more talented and more gifted and better as a team than the one they're playing, but they don't seem to play as well as they can because it seems like they play down to the level of the competition. You know what I'm talking about? You see this in certain sports. And given that level of talent, if you don't show up the way that you're supposed to, you could get beat by a professional team because there's a lot of talent there too. And once they see that there's some hope, they sometimes grab a hold of that and gain confidence. And so I use that illustration because in thinking about our lives, sometimes we just do what's expected of us, right? And part of that is because you get fatigued. Sometimes you get tired. Good enough is good enough, right? So you're training your children how to do chores around the house there, and you got to go back usually and give them a reminder of what needs to be done. And sometimes they will vacuum, but they won't move things around when they're vacuuming. Justin does some vacuuming in our house, and if I'm not on them there, usually to supervise, if I have a pile of books on the ground, and that's on me, but sometimes that's the way it is, he'll just kind of vacuum around that, And do you guys know what I'm talking about or no? You do? Okay. Yeah, and they vacuum around it, or if they wipe the table and there's something on the table there and on the counter and stuff, they wipe around it, and if they're allowed to get away with it, pretty soon the distance between that item on the counter and where the edge of the wiping is starts to grow. You know that? You know what I'm talking about? So you know what I mean? Those are the expectations, and sometimes we just do what's expected of us, or barely what's expected of us. And a lot of times when we think about things, what's expected of us is actually the bare minimum. But we tend to go down that way. And so, talking about, I told you guys before in a previous church where I was at, we had some standards that we expected of our leaders, people who were involved in volunteering in different areas of the church. And so one of the things was we had something called the 4 C's. And so it was the 4 corners. And so we expected people to attend worship regularly if they were going to be in leadership. We expected them to attend Sunday school regularly. If they were going to be in leadership, we expected them to be involved in some ministry where they're serving in the church, and we expected them to be involved in some sort of fellowship or life group. Those were bare minimums. But what happens is that becomes the standard at which you're actually a growing Christian in some people's minds. Well, I go to this, and I go to this, and I go to this, and I did this. And it just becomes instead of it saying, I should be doing that at the least, it becomes the standard and says, oh, because I'm doing that, I'm special. And that's how we can be too. We can just kind of go to this bottom level of expectations there, just barely meeting things and saying, okay, I'm okay. I attend church once a week. Or I attend 75% of the time. I'm not trying to lay down some legalistic thing on you. I'm just trying to say, hey, if we say that God is what we're all about, if we live to glorify Jesus Christ, how's that working out in our lives? Daniel here is a man of integrity, and it's no matter who is in charge, he continues to show this integrity, to execute his duties in an excellent way, it tells us, and it distinguishes himself in chapter 3. And it says because he has an excellent spirit in him. It doesn't mean that just because he has the spirit that he was gifted above everybody else. It's the idea that he surpassed his peers. That's what he was about. He sought to do things in this manner. And so as I examine his life and I think about my own, before when I was young, I'd say, oh yeah, I could be like Daniel. Throw me in the lion's den, I'll be just fine. And then I look at my life and I say, I have struggles in this area. I have trouble just taking care of my family, let alone taking care of some other things. And so I look at him and I see just really, not worshiping him, but just seeing what a man of integrity he was, what a man of faithfulness. And his trust was in God. He did a good job at what he did. He was able to maintain this high level of execution for a long period of time. They say he's probably about 80 years old here. And he was brought into exile as a teenager. So there's none of this sitting back on our laurels type of idea there and say, hey, I have arrived, I'm just going to coast on through here. He continued to do what he was going to do. And even when he was out of the picture, we find that he was still faithful. He was still close to the Lord, and that's why he was able to depend upon him the way that he did. So he's able to maintain this. It says that, as somebody who spends time with God regularly, and we see this as this chapter unfolds, we recognize that he strengthens himself in the Lord. Do we strengthen ourselves in the Lord? Where are you drawing your strength from? Someone has said that fatigue makes cowards of us all. I think the faster pace we go in life, the easier it is to say, I'm just too tired. I'm just too tired. We do this with our kids sometimes, right? We don't have the patience with them. We don't have to put in the time with them because I'm just too tired. Just go do it on your own type of thing. And only by God's grace does that ever work out in a way that's not completely destroying those relationships. So we got to make sure that it's a very basic thing, right? Do you get the idea that Daniel was up partying all the time? As a matter of fact, when there was a party going on, he was back at home. Someone had to go get him to go and do this. Remember we saw in chapter 5 there last time? So he's not fatigued. He spends regular time in prayer. He strengthens himself in the Lord. There are not a lot of people that you find like this in the world. That's the whole idea about being exceptional. If everybody's exceptional, nobody is. Exceptional means that you're different, right? And Daniel distinguishes himself this way. I mean, you think about it, when I was in Dallas and spent that time in seminary, whenever the name Tom Landry came up, Tom Landry always looked at as somebody, there's no negativity associated with him that I know of anyway. Football coach, they named buildings after him, that sort of thing, and he seemed to be a man of integrity. I follow basketball. Any of you watch NBA? Nah, it's okay. Oh, thank you. All right, so I'll talk to you. But the NBA logo, who's the NBA logo? Do you know? Jerry West. Jerry West, it's his image, it's his silhouette that they put on the logo, so they call him the logo, okay? He's 80 years old now. I think he just turned 80, if I'm not mistaken. And he's been involved. He was, as a player, he was an all-star and everything like that. And he's been involved in basketball operations as a manager and general manager, those sorts of things there. And it seems like no matter who you talk to about this man when it comes to basketball, all speak favorably of him. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what team he's been with. He's been with the Los Angeles Lakers. He's been with the Warriors. He's with the Los Angeles Clippers now. It doesn't matter. He's talked to players, young players, older players. They all have respect for this man. I don't know much else about him other than he's a really good golfer. At age 80, he can shoot below his age, supposedly. And so he's a good golfer, but he's also seemed to be a person of respect. And see, you don't say that about everybody, right? There's an exceptionalness about him. This is Daniel. He went above and beyond expectations. If you want to be a person who's exceptional in your integrity and faithfulness, go above and beyond expectations. It's not easy. You can start off with easy being younger, and then as you keep going, you get tired, right? But you got to keep on pursuing it, and you got to recognize what God is doing, how he wants for us to give to him our very best. And that should be the motivation. It's not just going to come in our own strength. It's going to come as he equips us and strengthens us for it. As Daniel did this, you find out that there were people around him who didn't like him. You know how it is? Sometimes you always want to take down the person who's doing really well, like that goody two-shoes, right? And that's how they think about Daniel. It says, then the presidents and the satraps in verse 4. Thank you. Then the presidents and the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, but they could find no ground for complaint or any fault because he was faithful and no error or fault was found in him. If somebody looked at your life, could they say that about you? They say the only way that we're ever going to take this Daniel down, we can't do it in the ways of executing his work or anything like that. The only way we're going to be able to find fault with him is to somehow or another pit his God, his faithfulness and his allegiance to God against the laws of the land. That's the only way we're going to be able to get this guy and be able to bring him down. Do you think that's how somebody would look at your life? Would they say, hey, that's the only way we could find and put a black mark in this person's life? That's what they did with Daniel. They became envious because he was better than they were. They wanted to take him down. And so what they did is they schemed and they connived, and that's what we find here as we move on. Can I get the next slide? Yeah. And it says that they go and they scheme and connive, and they find a way to kind of to make this work the way that they're planning it. And we find out here that Daniel chooses faithfulness in the trial. He chooses faithfulness in the trial. So verse 6 says, then these presidents and satraps came by agreement. Their agreement was with one another. It didn't include Daniel. And it says, by agreement to the king, and said to him, O King Darius, live forever. All the presidents of the kingdom, except Daniel, right? The prefects and the satraps, the counselors and the governors are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction. And we don't know that it's everyone. They're lying about the fact that Daniel is included in this. So it's probably just a few or a group of people. Usually you don't always have the majority, but you have the loudest ones. And so these are the ones that are there. And they get together, agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked. Therefore, the King Darius signed the document and injunction. So they get together and they make this law. And they said, here's the law. For the next 30 days, no one can pray to anybody else. If they need anything, they need to pray to you, king. So you get to be king for a month. I mean, you get to be God for a month, I guess I should say. And that's appealing to him. And as we looked at the previous kings, we find out that they could do whatever they want. They just make a decree and then they go and do it, and people are supposed to obey them. But it seems like as the law changes and these kingdoms change, that people are a little less concerned, or a little more concerned about the king just having absolute power. So together they have a kind of a checks and balances, so that if the king signs a law that's already put in place, he can't just turn around and revoke that law. We see this in the book of Esther, chapter 8. You remember how Haman had gotten the king and had written this decree? Do you remember that? And said that they could go and on this day they're going to go and destroy the Jews? Yes? Please shake your head. Yes? If you All right, good. And so you see this in Esther, and they couldn't change it. But what the king did is he said, okay, we can write another law that says, okay, if people are going to go after the Jews, then we're going to write a law that says the Jews can go up and they can destroy anybody who tries to go after them. They can defend themselves. So he couldn't pull back the law, but he wrote another law to deal with it. And so it's the same idea here. They got this law, the law of the Medes and Persians, and it can't be revoked. And so King Darius signs this law, and as people have conspired against him. And so when Daniel knew that the document had been signed, we find out in verse 10, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. So Daniel's not doing anything different than what he's always done. He's a man of integrity. Who you see when nobody else is watching is the same guy you see in public. He's a person who's faithful to God, and he's going to pray. And so some commentators say, oh, he wanted to be a martyr. His desire wasn't to be a martyr. He's just acting the way he always acts. And it's worked for him, right? God has been faithful, been taking care of Daniel when he's been in the limelight and when he's been out of it. And so he does this. As he's done previously, he prays, and they find out he's praying. It's easy. He's not trying to hide it. He's got the windows open. And you know, what would you do if that was the situation? See, for us, I think for myself, I'm thinking, hey, I don't have to pray out loud. I can just pray silently, right? Nobody needs to know I'm praying. It's just between me and God. How many of you pray over your meals when you go out and eat? How many of you are, you don't have to raise your hand, but sometimes, right, there are places, when I was in school, we would pray there and people would like, what are you doing, right? What are you doing? And so you just get used to it, right? It becomes the way that you do it, and you don't think twice about it. But maybe if a law came on the books that you can't pray in a restaurant before your meal, maybe we would think twice about it. We just look at the food and say, I'm praying right now, God, thank you for the food. And then you just dig in, right? So Daniel could have done that, but he didn't. He did it just like he had done before. And so he got out and he prayed and he prayed. And we find out that Daniel, had the book of Jeremiah with him. It says that the book of Jeremiah was written, it says in chapter 29, verses 1 through 7, and I don't have those up on the screens around me. But it says, I'm going to read it to you from Jeremiah chapter 29. These are the words of the letter that Jeremiah the prophet sent from Jerusalem to the surviving elders of the exiles and to the priests, the prophets, and all the people whom Nebuchadnezzar had taken into exile from Jerusalem. This was after King Jeconiah and the queen mother, the eunuchs, the officials of Judah and Jerusalem, the craftsmen and the metalworkers had departed from Jerusalem. The letter was sent by hand by Elisah, the son of Shaphan, and Gemariah, the son of Hilkiah, and a couple of other people here whose names are in there. And it said, thus says the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, to all the exiles whom I have sent into exile from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and live in them. Plant gardens and eat their produce. Take wives and have sons and daughters. Take wives for your sons and give your daughters in marriage, that they may bear sons and daughters. Multiply there and do not decrease. So this is what was given to them, Jeremiah, to encourage the exiles there. And as they were there, verse 7 says, but seek the welfare of the city where I have sent you into exile, and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its welfare you will find your welfare. So Daniel here, being in this foreign, strange land, as an alien there, as an exile there, he's taking these words to heart. And he's praying for his government as well. He's recognizing that, hey, as this government goes, so go I. And so he says, in its welfare, you will find your welfare. And so Daniel obeys this, and he trusts in God, and he he follows this. Even though he did all of that and he showed himself faithful, we know that the king threw Daniel into the lion's den. And he couldn't change the law, and that even though he stayed up, even though he tried to do that, and it troubled him to do this because he knew Daniel was a good guy. He fasted all night, and no diversions were given to him. Finally, at the end here, we're going to jump here. I am just having a hard time. This thing is just not working at all, so I'm going to ask you to just go. Get me to the third point, please. There you go. Daniel entrusted himself to God. So he didn't change anything. He continued to pray. The king didn't change anything. He had to follow this decree that he had put on the books there. And so he puts Daniel in the lion's den, and he tells Daniel, he says, may the God whom you serve continually, may he watch over you, or may he deliver you. But the king didn't really believe that, I don't think, because in the next morning it says that he comes out with a tone of anguish in his voice there. And he says, oh, Daniel, Daniel, are you, he cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, oh, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to deliver you from the lions? And then Daniel spoke to him. Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever." And so Daniel said it was God. He sent his angel, and his angel closed the mouth of the lions. And some people say the reason the lions didn't eat Daniel is because they weren't hungry. But we find out later that those people who conspired against Daniel, they and their families got thrown into the lion's den. And before they could reach the ground, they got a hold of them. Okay? So it can't be because the lions weren't hungry. Had to be because some miraculous thing took place. And in this case, God sent his angel and closed the mouth of the lions. You know the story. Daniel entrusted himself to God. Do we entrust ourselves to God? See, we have a very practical sense about life and about things here. And so a lot of times I find this in myself, that a lot of times I get kind of practical about things. And so I'm saying, well, God doesn't really expect me to do that. That wouldn't be practical, and after all, God is wise. But there are situations, and Daniel recognized this as one of them. He was just going to trust God. There wasn't anything else he could do about it. He couldn't reason his way out of it. He couldn't appeal to the king to change anything. He understood the laws, and he entrusted himself to God. He said, okay, Lord, what was he thinking while he was in the lion's den? We don't know. Is he thinking, this is it? Is this how it goes? I've faithfully served you and followed you, and you brought me into exile, and it's been all these years, and just to come to this? If that's what you want, then I guess that's how it is. I don't know what he was thinking, but sometimes we get those feelings in our lives there, and you say, is this it? Is this how it's going to end for me, Lord? And yet I'm still standing here, right? And so are you. And so we know that God is faithful. We just need to keep trusting ourselves and entrusting ourselves to him, and just let him do his thing in our lives, whatever that is. As we talked about, and I told you about in the original languages in which this is written, it's Aramaic, and I told you there's this kind of structure to it. And so this chapter 6 and chapter 3 go kind of hand in hand. There's a parallelism to them. Just like Daniel's friends get thrown into the fiery furnace and God delivers them, Daniel gets thrown into the lion's den and God delivers him. But you remember in chapter 3, they said, hey, even if God doesn't deliver me, we're still not going to bow down and worship an idol. And so their integrity was there. Here's Daniel as well. I don't know, we know of situations where there are people, that God didn't deliver miraculously in situations. And that's his wisdom. That's his mind. His ways are higher than our ways. We don't understand that. But it's God doing what he's doing. Our job is to just entrust ourselves to him. And so as we look at Daniel's life, we recognize there's this challenge to us. We say we want to be like Daniel. How are we going to live this exceptional life of integrity and faithfulness? Well, first of all, it requires us coming before the Lord and trusting ourselves to him, asking him to strengthen us, and doing our part to stay close to him. As we do that, he watches over us. As we do that, we grow more sensitive to what he's doing in our lives, and we can walk closely with him. Sound good? So if you just want to fit in, which sometimes we have that pressure in our world, just to fit in, we'll just be average and fit in. But I think God wants us to stand out like a sore thumb in our society, because if we're going to live a life that's faithful to him, we are going to live a life of exceptional integrity and faithfulness, and we will stand out. And let that be our witness in this world. That many others would come to know Christ as Lord and Savior too.